Oh, I think we're live. Okay. Do I need to stop and restart maybe? Would that do it? Hello, viewer. Hopefully the viewer is not me. Leave. Tweet. Shall we tweet? Yes, we shall. Okay, and I tweeted. Should be on my Facebook page. There it is. That's not accurate, but okay. 0 watching. There it goes. Alright, alright. So, yes, let me put this up in that tab over there. Yes, there we go. No, that did not work. There we go. So, I'll keep an eye on this stream and this chat. And if anyone should show up, we'll decide what we should do. Play games, or comb my hair, or speak softly, or both, or I don't know. I don't know. Self-deception in psychopathology. That sounds interesting. No, that's not what I want to hear right now. Here we go. Hey, we have a viewer. Hello. Video output low? Oh no. What does that mean? It's not very loud. No, that's not. How are you? Who are you? In fact, say something in chat such as hello, or in my case, howdy. Alright, so Facebook is open, YouTube is open. Huh. Well, maybe put this down here. And put that up there. Ah ha ha ha. Fancy. Am I the one watching? Is that it? That could be it. That would be weird. Okay, there's a chat. Maybe. No, I don't know. Messages. Oh. That's right, it updated. There we go. Okay, okay. So I tweeted. I guess I'll get started watching this video. Oh my god, it's been recording for this long. Shit. That sucks. Ooh, that sucks. Okay, let me hit save. Turtles all the way down. And how big is that file gonna be? Boy. Okay, there it is. It's approximately... It doesn't say. Huh. So... Open file location. Okay, there's the data. 2.5 gigs of data. Okay, what about that one? 8 megs. Whew. Okay, 2.5 gigs. Damn. Excuse me. It was a snooze. I snoozed. Okay, so I can close Audacity. I can minimize Steam, I suppose. And I can watch this Dr. Peterson lecture until someone decides to show up. Ha ha ha. Well, let me copy and paste that to my Facebook. Yes. Where else can I share this? I guess I could share it on Google Plus, but who even looks at Google Plus? Am I right? Oy. Okay, I posted it there. I don't think I can post it to any of these other places. Maybe Tumblr, but I rarely use Tumblr. Rarely. Oh, wait. So it's gonna let me post to Tumblr. Ta-da. Oh, it's gonna make me log in, is it? Did that work? Oh, no, it did not. Alright. Oh. How about now? Did that work? No, I don't. Did it? Yes, it did. Alright. Okay. ASMR. Hashtag ASMR. Hashtag audiobook. Hashtag nerdfighters. Hashtag John Green. Hashtag turtles. All the way down. Hashtag Jordan Peterson. Hashtag video games. Hashtag music. Hashtag voice. Hashtag voiceover. Hashtag. That's probably enough hashtags. You might want to try the embed code instead. Well, where is the embed code? The embed code, the embed code. Where is the embed code who lives on Drury Lane? Oh, Nerdfighter Poets. Okay. I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm sorry, but yes. Do you know the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man? Okay. Any more viewers? No, still just one. Just one.
Turns out that...
Subscribe to whoever that is. Let me... Whoa, what did I click? Uh-oh. Did not mean to click that, whatever that was. Okay, so pause and let me minimize that one. Yes, quite indeed. Indubitably. Oh, notification. Okay, no viewers still. Perhaps I should put my screen on the screen. That might make for a more interesting video. Damn, let me minimize all these chats. Close, 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 close. Yes, there we go. Let me close that one too. Yeah, it's okay. So, video output low. Once again, turn on display capture. Oh my. Okay, I guess that works. Huh. Alright, let's watch this, I guess. Turn the volume back down there. Going to be missing chats, though. That's the other thing. Now, YouTube says my stream health is back in the green, but I do not know. It also says the stream has been on for 13 minutes. 13 minutes. Huh. Okay, so my second screen is out of commission at the moment. I don't know why. It was making a strange noise and it wasn't lighting up all the way, so I might need to look into what is causing that and fix it. I will soon. I don't know why I'm being so weird, sorry. I'm just tired. Should probably just go to sleep, huh? What do you think? I might go on Meet Me Live for funsies. See what happens there. I don't know. And just do both at the same time. Oh my. Let me turn off Wi-Fi on my phone, however, so as not to overload the bandwidth or anything like that. Yes, alright, let me take a sip of my tea. I need a Kleenex too, then. Yes. Yes, I do. Okay. Maybe I could just minimize this and minimize that. Yes. Close that. Yes. Voila. That like that, and put this like this. Woo. That might work. Yes, and it works swimmingly. Okay. Oy, oy, oy. Maybe a little bit further to the left. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Closer, closer. Yeah, that's good. That's fine. Alrighty then. Whoo. Will this make it bigger? Slightly. That's good. That's fine, yes. How about over here? Okay. That, like that, yes, that's quite right. Okay. Now I can use my phone for Facebook. Let us continue with the video.
So I'm going to tell you today about a way of looking at the world that I think is substantially different from the way that most people look at the world. And the way I want to tell you about looking at the world today is, I think, more inclusive than a standard sort of materialist view. Like the standard scientific view of the world, of course, is that it's made up of familiar objects, and that the world is, in essence, a material place. But there's some very potent limitations of that viewpoint, despite the fact that it's given us tremendous power. And the limitations are essentially as follows. The essential materialist view can't tell us anything about consciousness, which is probably the primary fact of experience. Neuroscientists in recent years, mostly in the last decade, have been trying to crack the problem of consciousness, and they have absolutely made no progress. They've tried to associate consciousness with neuronal activity, but that seems to be an incomplete answer because there's many forms of neuronal activity in the brain that aren't accompanied by consciousness at all. Not only do neuroscientists understand virtually nothing about consciousness, they can't even really figure out what its function is. They can't understand why our brains would go to so much effort to make us aware of things when it isn't clear at all that awareness is necessary for life, especially given that there are many life forms on the planet that don't seem to be aware at all. The standard materialist view is also insufficient in many other ways. It's insufficient philosophically, I think, as you probably all know, because a conception that portrays the world as made up of objects is in some really fundamental way dead. Right? It doesn't seem to have a place in it for human beings, or a place in it for meaning, or a mode whereby you might be able to conceptualize the real existence of something like an emotion, or a dream, or a motivation. All phenomena which are just as mysterious to neuroscientists and to scientists in general as consciousness. Now the problem with this seems to be mostly experiential. If you have to ask people what they know more than anything else, they know, number one, that they're conscious. They know, number two, that their internal experiential life is composed of emotions and motivational states, which, although not rational in essential structure, are so real and relevant that virtually everything that people do is predicated on them. So our current viewpoint, despite its ability to give us tremendous technological power, seems to eradicate from formal consideration many, many essential experiences that are vital to life, in fact, even perhaps primary. Now, I'm going to suggest to you today that there's an alternative viewpoint, and I think also it's one that, although you may be hearing about it formally for the first time, is also something that you know unbelievably deeply. How thousands of years ago, Plato proposed that all knowledge was remembering. Of course, we don't believe that today because we believe we gather knowledge as a consequence of contact with the world. But you'll see today that the knowledge that I'm going to share with you will strike a deep chord of remembering, and it's because everything that you've done throughout your life is in one way or another predicated on what I'm going to tell you today. I'm going to demonstrate this in a peculiar way, I think, because I'm going to start by telling you a story. And the reason I'm going to do that is because models of the world that include phenomena like consciousness and emotions and motivations and actions and interactions are generally portrayed formally in stories and not in scientific theories. And it does turn out to be that stories themselves have an identifiable structure, even a grammar that makes them comprehensible. Furthermore, it turns out that even the simplest stories, especially if they're elegantly constructed, have an unbelievably profound underlying meaning. And you can frequently see this most particularly in children's stories. So I remember I showed my son when he was 4 years old the Disney movie Pinocchio, which on the surface of it is a very strange tale, right? It's a wooden puppet who wants to become real, so he has to rescue his father from the belly of a whale, a structure that could by no means be considered rational, that is in fact so surprising and unexpected that it's remarkable to imagine that grown men and women, including children, can sit in a movie theater and watch a story like that unfold without ever thinking for a second that it's absolutely peculiar that they can be taken in by such a tale and regard it experientially as real. Pinocchio is a deep, deep story. It has echoes that go back 3,000 or 4,000 years to the earliest stories that we know, and it's so rich with information that a child can watch it over and over and over and over. I think my son watched Pinocchio 30 times. Why? Well, it's either because a child can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality, or it's because there's something to those stories that's much more potent than we actually consciously understand. It's kind of interesting too, you know, if you go to a video rental establishment, you'll find that in the top 10 highest grossing movies of all time are 4 Disney movies that are animated fairy tales, essentially retelling of mythological stories. They strike a deep chord. Why? Well, Shakespeare was, of course, a great literary figure, said it perhaps better than anyone else has, which is not surprising because he said many things better than anyone else has. He said all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. And so, following from that, you can imagine that a story is no more about the props in the world than a play that you go see is about the props on the stage. A drama is about the manner in which people actually exist, the emotions that they feel, the motivational states they encounter, the problems they have to solve when they interact with each other. And the play's the thing from that particular perspective in which we can capture those aspects of our experience that are not only real but essentially human. I'm going to tell you a little story to begin this off with. It's a kid's story written for children of about 4 years of age, but it's very, very elegant. I tried to cut it down for this talk, but I found I couldn't because it was so well edited that every single piece of it had to fit in to make the story complete. And I'm going to show you first the structure of the story. Now, this is a very useful diagram in many ways. It's very simple. Basically, it says this. Whenever you're doing anything, you inhabit a bounded world. Now, you know, like, for example, you're sitting here in this lecture, there's things you are paying attention to and things you're not. If I took most of you out of this room right now and asked you definitively what color the rug was, you wouldn't know, or what color your chair was, for example, or what the person next to you was wearing, unless that person happens to be your husband or your wife. You wouldn't remember any of those things. And the reason for that is when you're in a situation like this and you're attending to a speaker, most of the occurrences that are unfolding around you are irrelevant. You don't store them. You only focus on certain things. Well, how do you decide what to focus on, given that there's virtually unlimited number of things to pay attention to? Well, you have to conceive of yourself as being somewhere, always. And you have to conceive of yourself as going somewhere. So you could say, in a real sense, the world you inhabit is a journey. It's a journey from point A to point B, a journey from what is to what should be. A journey from the place you are, which is insufficient in some important manner, to a place that in some important manner is going to be better. A standard story has exactly that structure. A child comes home and you say, well, what happened to you today on the way to school? Setting up the little narrative structure. The child will unfold the sequence of events that he encountered. If the story's more interesting than just a recount of exactly what happened to him, it usually involves the encounter with something unexpected on the way to point B and a description of the manner in which that encounter with the unexpected was resolved. Typical story. Now, why would you want to know that? Why would you want to listen to it? Well, it's because on your journey from point A to point B, all sorts of unexpected things always happen. And if someone else has encountered something unexpected and conjured up a decent solution to it, it could well be worth your time to listen. Well, maybe there's a pattern to encountering unexpected things. Maybe there's a proper way to encounter the unexpected. Maybe it's the case that in our collective wisdom as human beings, we've gathered up representations of ways to encounter the unexpected that we put forth in our stories. How should you face what you don't understand? Well, now I'm going to tell you this story. It's written for 4-year-old kids. But I want you to take a look at it for a moment from a different perspective and see if you can imagine exactly what it is that it's saying. There's no such thing as a dragon. Well, we all know that, right? A dragon is a fictitious creature. Reptilian, terrible, lives forever, breathes fire, hoards gold. Strange combination of attributes. Why would something terrible and ancient hold a treasure? Billy Bixby was rather surprised when he woke up one morning and found a dragon in his room. It was a small dragon about the size of a kitten. The dragon wagged its tail happily when Billy patted its head. It's interesting, you know, in Chinese mythology, the dragon is a positive figure. In European mythology, the dragon is something to face in combat and destroy, or something to face in combat and build something out of the pieces left over from the dragon. Billy went downstairs to tell his mother. There's no such thing as a dragon, said Billy's mother. And she said it like she meant it. Remember once my daughter had a nightmare. She was about 4. This was at the time when she first started to notice graffiti and litter. And both graffiti and litter bothered her. She couldn't understand the motivations behind the graffiti artist. And she didn't like the fact that there was litter cluttering up the world's order. And the reason she got sensitive to that as a child was because children are really, really dependent on order, right? I mean, and the reason for that is that their realm of competence is rather restricted. So they don't like to see things messed up. So little kids, for example, they're not happy with you if you play a game with them and then mess around with the rules of the game. They don't like that at all. They think that that's immoral activity to shake up the structure of the game. Well, anyways, while she was pondering all this, she came into our bedroom one night and said, Dad, I had a nightmare. Now, we all know, right? Nightmares aren't real, just like dragons. Dreams aren't real. Of course, which raises the question of why in the world you bother having them 6 or 7 hours a night every single day of your life, and why they're a recognized feature of animal behavior all the way down to the amphibian level. She said, I dreamt that there was a clear flowing stream, but in the stream there was all sorts of garbage, and it scared me and bothered me so much I woke up. So I told her, look, close your eyes and imagine the stream. It's full of garbage. What should you do about it? She said, well, I should take the garbage out of the stream. I said, all right, so picture the stream, picture yourself cleaning the garbage out of it. She calmed down and went back to sleep. Why? Well, because dreams concentrate on threat. We know that. They present threats to you, threats you haven't been able to deal with well. There's a part of your brain that tracks threats, and it's not really all that smart in some ways. All it does is say, look, here's the problem. And it's waiting for the rest of your brain to conjure up some solution to that problem. And if it doesn't conjure up the solution, then it just presents the problem over and over and over and over and over. So people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, who've been really upset by their contact with something unexpected, dream about the same tragedy forever until they solve it. And they solve it by facing it and living it over and over, voluntarily. So you might think right off the bat from listening to that little story that suggesting to your 4-year-old daughter who's just had a nightmare that her fears aren't real and that the dream representation of them isn't real because it's not tangible like a table might not really be the best approach to the problem. So you see, Billy, he's pretty much got it right off the bat, right? The dragon wagged its tail happily when Billy patted its head. Billy went downstairs to tell his mother. There's no such thing as a dragon, said Billy's mother, and she said it like she meant it. So there's a dragon in this house. Now the next thing you might wonder is, how often have you actually gone into a house where there's a dragon? My guess is if you don't take this particularly specifically and allow yourself to use your imagination and to think metaphorically for a moment, you've all encountered dozens of houses that were filled right to the rafters with various dragons, all of which were being studiously ignored by the people who inhabited the house. Billy went back to his room and began to dress. The dragon came close to Billy in a friendly manner and wagged its tail, but Billy didn't pat it. If there's no such thing as something, it's silly to pat it on the head. Billy washed his face and hands and went down to breakfast. The dragon went along. It was bigger now, almost the size of a dog. Billy sat down at the table. The dragon sat down on the table. This sort of thing was not usually permitted, but there wasn't much Billy's mother could do about it. She already said there was no such thing as a dragon. And if there's no such thing, you can't tell it to get down off the table. Sometimes I sit with friends of mine who have very young children to eat, say. And the children, 2 or 3 years old, don't sit at the table, they sit on the table, or they run around the table, or they run around the table and pull things off the table, or they run around the house and pull things off all the shelves in the house and keep their parents so busy chasing them around that they have no time whatsoever to interact as adults. Well, you have to wonder under those circumstances whether you're dealing with a child or a dragon, so to speak. And you also might wonder whether or not the dragon is large and unruly, precisely because the parents are completely unwilling to admit that it actually exists. Mother made some pancakes for Billy, but the dragon ate them all. Mother made some more, but the dragon ate those too. Mother kept making pancakes until she ran out of batter. Billy only got one of them, but he said that's all he really wanted anyway. One time, an acquaintance of ours in Boston brought their son over to be babysat at our house, and his nanny had just been in a car accident, so he was being shunted from house to house while his parents went off to work. And he didn't have a very good reputation, this kid. He was about 4. And he came over to our house and with his mother in the morning, and she dropped him off, and she said, well, he probably won't eat all day, but that's all right. And I thought, no, he's 4. If he doesn't eat all day, that's not all right, right? Because kids, if they don't eat, they're basically horrible, right? If they don't sleep and they don't eat, they're horrible. So it isn't all right that he doesn't eat. So then you think, well, maybe there's some sort of dragon associated with this child that happens to be interfering perhaps with his ability to eat. So I came back at noon. My wife had taken care of the children that day, and I walked in the house, and the other 4 or 5 kids that we had in the house were off playing, and this little kid was standing in the corner, like really isolated and looking, you know, upset fundamentally. So I went over and I poked him a bunch, because generally if you poke a kid a little bit, you know, well, they'll go like this, you know, they'll sort of back off, but sooner or later you can crack them and they'll smile and then they'll play. Not this kid, boy, there's no bloody way he's going to play with me, and that was that. Like, he already learned that adults should either be ignored or that they were trouble. And he wasn't going to let any adult into his little world. So there was absolutely a dragon associated with that little boy, and it was eating all his pancakes. Billy went upstairs to brush his teeth. Mother started clearing the table. The dragon, who was quite as big as Mother by this time, made himself comfortable on the hall rug and went to sleep. I really like this one. By the time Billy came back downstairs, the dragon had grown so much he filled the hall. Billy had to go around by way of the living room to get to where his mother was. I didn't know dragons grew so fast, said Billy. There's no such thing as a dragon, said Mother firmly. Cleaning the downstairs took Mother all morning. What with the dragon in the way and having to climb in and out of windows to get from room to room. So, you know, you think back in your own experience when you've gone to a house where there's a dragon hiding underneath the living room rug and nobody's saying anything about it. And then you think, how long does it take to get something absolutely simple done in a house that's absolutely jammed to the rafters with unfinished business? Forever, right? Organizing people in a household like that, to even do something as simple as go out for breakfast in the morning, or even perhaps to make a meal, is virtually impossible. Why? Well, because there's something going on in the household that has been studiously ignored for a very long time and has grown so large as a consequence that it occupies the whole domain. By noon, the dragon filled the house. Its head hung out the front door, its tail hung out the back door, and there wasn't a room in the house that didn't have some part of the dragon in it. When the dragon awoke from his nap, he was hungry. The bakery truck went by. The smell of fresh bread was more than the dragon could resist. He ran down the street after the bakery truck. The house went along, of course, like the shell on a snail. The mailman was just coming up the path with some mail for the Bixbys when their house rushed past him and headed down the street. He chased the Bixby's house for a few blocks, but he couldn't catch it. When Mr. Bixby came home for lunch, the first thing he noticed was that his house was gone. Luckily, one of the neighbors was able to tell him which way it went. You know, that sort of thing happens to people not infrequently too, right? They're not really looking around much at what's going on, and they come home from work one day and their house is gone. Now, what does that mean? Well, maybe their children have become completely alienated from them, or maybe their wife has decided suddenly, but of course not so suddenly, to leave. Why? Well, according to this story, it's because something ignored was growing in the house. Mr. Bixby got in his car and went looking for the house. He studied all the houses as he drove along. Finally, he saw one that looked familiar. Billy and Mrs. Bixby were waving from an upstairs window. You know, in the 1890s in India, when a house was being built, the local priest, equivalent to the priest, would come by to set the foundation stone. And when he set the foundation stone, he'd take a big spike and drove it into the ground. And the reason he drove it into the ground at the place where the foundation was going to be laid was to keep the great dragon that is underneath the earth firmly pinned down by its head so it couldn't move and shake the house to bits. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means the same thing that's meant in the New Testament when you're told not to build your house on a foundation of sand, right? It doesn't matter how good the house is or how well constructed it is or how rich it is. If the foundation is made out of sand or if it rests on top of a dragon, there's nothing in that household that's ever going to be accomplished that's positive. And the wealth, the display that the house might consist of is nothing but a sham. Mr. Bixby climbed over the dragon's head onto the porch roof and through the upstairs window. "How did this happen?" Mr. Bixby asked. "It was the dragon," said Billy. "There's no such thing," Mother started to say. "There is a dragon," Billy insisted, "a very big dragon." And Billy patted the dragon on the head. The dragon wagged its tail happily. Then, even faster than it had grown, the dragon started getting smaller. Soon it was kitten size again. "I don't mind dragons this size," said Mother. "Why did it have to grow so big?" "I'm not sure," said Billy, "but I think it just wanted to be noticed." So the first thing you might think about is just what happens if you don't pay a bill? Like, really don't pay it, right? I mean, when it first comes in, it's only the size of a kitten. But if you leave it alone for 2 or 3 years, it pretty much grows into a full-fledged dragon. Why? Well, because things that you ignore have a life of their own, complex life, like a bill. A bill is attached to a whole industrial complex, right? One of whose major functions is to make sure that you pay the bill. And if you don't pay the bill, then you immediately find out what it's connected to. It's connected to something immense and very troublesome. And if you allow the full force of that thing to manifest itself, it's not pretty. So one lesson from this story is that if something's nagging at you just a bit, it's probably better to deal with it before it turns into a full-fledged dragon. And then you might think, well, what if it's already a full-fledged dragon, right? I mean, then what's your option? Is there nothing left but to run away? And so then I can tell you what we know from 50 years of studying the outcome of clinical psychological interventions. So let's take an extreme case, right? Let's say something truly terrible has happened to you, and as a consequence of that, you're in shock, post-traumatic shock, which is a condition that's sufficiently serious to damage your brain over time. It's not only a psychological disorder, it's a physical disorder. If you're really stressed, your cortisol levels shoot up. And if your cortisol levels shoot up, that cortisol in high doses is a neurotoxin, starts to damage your brain. So let's take a very extreme case and imagine that you've been violently sexually assaulted, and as a consequence of that, you're in post-traumatic shock. How do you get cured? So that means you can't really go outside. You certainly can't encounter anything that's associated with the event. Your sense of integrity and personal safety has been completely destroyed. Is there any way you can get back on your feet? No, there's a woman named Edna Foa in New York, I think one of the world's top clinical psychologists, and she's been dealing with women who have post-traumatic stress disorder for decades. And she's found a treatment that works. And the treatment is this. She has the women relive the event in as much detail as possible, over and over in their imagination, with the accompanying emotion. And she's found, because she's done physiological measurements on her clients, that those women that allow themselves to get the most fully upset as a consequence of the reliving get better faster and stay better longer. The clinical evidence is absolutely clear. When you take someone to therapy, you're basically doing two things to them. Well, three. You allow them to confess what's wrong with them, because it's really useful to actually say what it is that's bothering you. It makes it clear and distinct. You help the person get their story straight, because you have to have your story straight, right? You have to know where you're coming from, and you have to know where you're going, because otherwise there's no structure for your life. And the third thing is, if your path from point A to B is being blocked by something that you're afraid of, you better learn to confront it, because if you don't, it will grow and expand until it turns into the kind of dragon that occupies your whole house. This is another representation of a story. It's a simple story. I think it's one that's really most applicable to children. There are aspects of it that are most applicable to children. Sexual desire one obviously isn't. It's a map of motivation. It basically says this, and it's easy to understand if you think, you go to a movie, doesn't matter what country it's made, there's certain things that always happen, right? Like two broad classes of fiction, adventure and romance. What's an adventure? To go to new lands and discover something new and become transformed as a consequence. What's a romance? To meet another person who's certainly as complicated as anything you could meet on an adventure. And again, to be transformed as a consequence of the contact. Two fundamental plots. Why? Why are there fundamental plots? And why can we understand them without them being explained to us? Well, it's because fundamentally we're all very, very similar. We have a finite set of basic needs. So for example, hot people would rather be cool. Thirsty people would rather have water. Hungry people would rather eat. And these motivations color what we conceive of as our ultimate destiny. So in the Old Testament, for example, an agrarian community, often hungry, paradise was construed as the land of milk and honey. Well, why? Well, milk is high in fat, and honey is high in glucose. And if you're hungry, really hungry, there's nothing you want more than fat and sugar. Affiliative desire. We like to be around other people. Sexual desire. A fundamental sub-element of a romantic plot. These underlying motivational systems of ours set us up bounded worlds within which we live. So for example, if you fall in love with someone and you construe your destiny as being with them, any indication that they're pleased with you is going to produce a rush of positive emotion. Why? Because our emotional systems are set up so that any sign that we're moving towards our goal is responded to with a rush of positive emotion. And conversely, a frown from the person that you love, especially in the initial stages of a romance, is met with a flood of negative affect. Why? Because anything that stops us on the path that we've chosen produces negative emotion. That's how we're set up. And our emotional systems are actually quite straightforward. We posit a goal. The thing about people is that we can posit virtually anything as a goal. That's one of the things that distinguishes us from animals. So we can all be thrilled to death when our favorite soccer team scores a goal, because we participate in what they're doing, the same way we participate in watching a protagonist on a movie or in a book. We can feel it. We embody it. We even know now that the neural systems that I utilize to watch a movie involve the same neural systems that the actor is utilizing acting out the part. So when you say you understand someone else, what you mean is your body is set to do exactly the same thing their body is, and your emotional systems are locked on exactly the same way theirs are. So when they experience something and you're watching it, you experience an echo of it, and that's what understanding means. And it turns out as well that those neural systems that allow us to embody someone else and to imitate them are right underneath the structures that we've evolved to use for language. And what that indicates is that mostly what we use language for is to tell stories. To tell stories about the way that people act, so that we can derive information, not about what the world's made of, because we don't really care about that in some fundamental way, but instead, how should we act? That's the fundamental question. How should we act? Now, if you go see a movie about a thug, the message there is, given that the thug generally comes to not so good end, don't act like a thug, right? Interesting though it might be, compelling as a lifestyle, at least sufficiently compelling so you'll watch it, it's not a good long-term strategy. What is a good long-term strategy? You know, we've been collecting stories as people for we don't know how long, really. We don't know, 100,000 years maybe. There's been creatures like us, indistinguishable from us, for 100,000 years. And we know that societies that appear to be more or less as archaic as those old societies tell stories, have rituals, have mythology. We have ancient written stories, like the Enuma-Elish, which is a Sumerian story, the oldest written story we have, 4,000 years old, based on a oral tradition that's probably 20,000 years older than that. We've been collecting stories for a long, long time. What do they mean? What are they good for? Well, imagine this, you know, you tell a story to your husband or your wife, about something interesting that you saw, right? Well, then imagine that you could collect 1,000 of the most interesting stories. And then imagine that you were some kind of literary genius like Shakespeare, and you could take those 1,000 interesting stories and boil them down
to BRB.
really interesting stories. And then imagine that you had 10,000 year oral tradition that's probably 20,000 years older than that. We've been collecting stories for a long, long time. What do they mean? What are they good for? Well, imagine this, you know, you tell a story to your husband or your wife, about something interesting that you saw, right? Well, then imagine that you could collect 1,000 of the most interesting stories. And then imagine that you were some kind of literary genius like Shakespeare, and you could take those 1,000 interesting stories and boil them down to 100 really interesting stories. And then imagine that you had 10,000 years to gather up those 100 most interesting stories and average them, and you could come out with one perfect story, the best story, the most interesting story that you could possibly tell. Well, that's what a myth is. It's the most interesting story you can possibly tell. And just as this little story that I just told you had an underlying mythological structure, virtually every story you ever see has such a structure. That's why it's compelling to you. And when you meet someone who's charismatic or who holds your attention or who you're interested in, the probability that they're acting out a mythological fragment is very, very high. And that's why it is that your attention is captivated by them. What's the world like from this perspective? Well, look, you know, you're all sitting in this room. You think, if I took you out of here, how would you describe it? Well, you'd say it was full of chairs, there was a table, lights. Well, why would you pick that level of resolution? Eh? Like, why wouldn't you say, well, you know, the average ceiling tile had about 15,000 dots on it. Doesn't seem like a relevant data point, right? You'd say the same thing about the rug. There's nothing stopping you from counting the number of stains or the number of red spots or the way the light plays off your partner's shirt or the shine on your shoes. And if you were an artist, say, and trying to make a representation of this room, you'd concentrate on aspects of it that were completely different from those that you're concentrating on now. You talk about chairs, TV cameras, cabinets, tables. Why? They're functional. They're objects, right? They're tools. They're tools. They're things you can use. Normally, when you're going from point A to point B, you divide up the world into things you can use. Those are things you see. Your perceptual systems do this. Things you can use. And things that might get in the way. And as you move from motivated world to motivated world, the little stories that you inhabit, you chop the world up in different pieces. So a piano for a concert pianist is different. It's a different phenomena than a piano for someone who has no musical education. But you're always parsing up the world in terms of what it's good for, how it can serve your purposes, and you even see it that way. Now the question is, the complicated question isn't so much, how do you parse up the world into things that are useful to you, like chairs? The complicated question is, what do you do when something that you don't expect happens? So imagine you've had a 15-year-long marriage, and you find lipstick on your husband's collar. Not once, but 3 times. And then you think, well, I thought I had him mapped, right? I thought we were both in the same game. I thought we were both going from point A to the same point B. I thought we had established a shared structure of interpretation, but I find that there's some aspect of his apparent behavior that's completely outside my scope of interpretation. What do? Well, you can choose to ignore that, right? It's easy to do that. Why would you ignore it? Because if you don't ignore it, you have to think, he's not who I thought he was. And that's really not a good thing to think, because people are really, really, really complicated. And if they're not who you think they are, you have no idea who they might be. And you also might think, well, maybe I'm not who I think I am, because after all, I got sucked into this situation. I thought I pretty much understood the world, and turns out that I certainly don't understand the opposite gender, and there's some indication that I really don't even understand myself, because fundamentally I'm so clueless. And then you might think, well, when did this start, this cluelessness? How long have I been blind? Well, do you really want to ask that question? Well, not generally, right? It's easier to keep the dragon in the closet, which is where it tends to live. What happens when you encounter something you don't expect? For a long time, psychologists thought that people learned fear, right? So your typical person, your typical lab rat, was a calm creature. Now, it's a funny thing, because if you take a lab rat out of his home cage, and you put him in a new cage where you want to teach him, say, to be afraid of something, to be afraid of a light paired with a shock, which is a typical psychological experiment. The funny thing about the rat is you've got to let him calm down before he's normal. Well, except that you might think that the not calm rat is also the normal rat, right? You take the rat out of his cage and you put him in the new cage, and what does he do? He goes like this. Why? Well, he's a rat, right? Someone might eat him. So he's a bit nervous about being in this new situation. Rats do not like being in new situations. They don't like bright light. If you put them in a new situation that's brightly lit, they go right over to the corner because they think maybe cats won't find them. Rats are so afraid of cats that they never even have to meet a cat to be afraid of them. So you can take a rat that's never seen a cat in his life, and if you let him smell some cat odor or show him a cat, well, I'll tell you, if you show a rat a cat somewhere he doesn't expect it, he will run back to his burrow and scream for 24 hours. Now you imagine how scared you'd have to be to scream for 24 hours, especially given the rat only lives about a year. So that would be, for you, like screaming, that'd be like screaming for 3 months, right? So the rat runs back to his burrow, and he screams, and every other rat who hears him scream freezes. And they all stay like that for 24 hours, till they sort of calm down. And then the first thing they do is they go back to the place where they saw the cat, and they start to map it out. So they do these things called corner runs, which is, so the rat wants to go back to this territory. He knows the territory might be a place where he gets food. Is the cat still there? Well, you might think, stay in the burrow, right? But then maybe you don't get something to eat. So the rat goes back to the place where the cat was, carefully, and then he hunches down, and he runs over part of it. And if nothing kills him, then he goes back and does the same thing with a little more of the territory until finally the rats have run all over the territory again. Then they go back to eating, making love, paying attention to their families. Because rats are quite social despite the fact that they're rats. The rat's smart enough to go back to the scene of the crime, so to speak, right? It's not going to let the dragon that might be there grow. The rat knows that if something is terrifying, it should be investigated, not run away from. The question is, what do you encounter when you encounter something you don't expect? And so you say, well, you've got your spouse mapped out, right? But then they do something you don't expect, which hopefully happens fairly regularly, right? Because otherwise you get bored with them. They do something you don't expect, and you think, aha, who is that person precisely? And what that means is that when you encounter something unexpected, you actually can't see what's there. Why? Because it's too complicated. You might have to spend a month talking to your spouse to figure out just exactly why they have that particular peculiar opinion. You have to explore and dig to find out how they map the world. If you encounter something unexpected, the first thing you see is not the world. The first thing you see is just a sense of discomfort and fear combined with some latent curiosity that the world is not the way you thought it was. Now, how do you find out what the world is actually like? Well, you have to investigate it. You have to investigate it. It means you have to take a risk. You have to move forward the same way that people do in psychotherapy. You have to find the thing that you're bordering on avoiding and go in and map it. Now, it's a curious thing, you know. Common anxiety disorder is agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is a generalized anxiety disorder, and people who suffer severely from agoraphobia often get to the point where, because of their panics, they're housebound. They can't go outside their room or their house. Now, they'd run away from their room or their house too if they could, but there's nowhere to run, so they're pretty much stuck being somewhere. So, an agoraphobic comes in for therapy. You think, well, what do you do with them? And you say, well, the agoraphobic says, I can't go on elevators. And you say, okay, well, let's go try. And you say, all right, well, relax. Just teach the person to breathe. Which really doesn't help that much, but it makes them feel better. You can do this without teaching them to relax. It doesn't matter a bit, but it does help them feel better. You say, okay, well, there's the elevator. Say, how close can you get to the elevator? You say, well, I can't really get more than like 20 feet. That's maximum. I said, well, okay, let's just go up to 20 feet there, and they do that, and then you let them stand there and stand there and stand there and stand there and stand there. Sooner or later, they get bored of being 20 feet from the elevator. And then you say, well, look, could you go 10 feet? No, I couldn't go 10 feet. That's too close. How about, could you go 3 more feet? Yeah, I think I could do that. So they go 3 more feet, and then you let them stand there. And they find out nothing terrible is happening sooner or later. And then they go another 3 feet, and then they go another 3 feet. And then they're like confronting the elevator. And then they're inside the elevator, but they're going like this, because they don't want to look at the elevator, right? So you say, well, you got to look at the elevator, you got to look at the numbers, you got to look at the buttons. So they do that.
Oh, hello.
Think, well, could we go up?
How's it going?
No, we couldn't go up the floor. Okay, well, I'll tell you what.
Thank you for tuning in.
Close the door, I'll put my hand in, it'll open again. Could you do that? Yeah, I could do that. Step by step. Sooner or later, and you...
Just enjoying an old Jordan Peterson lecture. How are you? Oh, you left. What have you been up to? Dang. Scared you off, did I?
Usually sooner, bang, they've gone up the floor, right? So then what happens? They go home and have a fight with their husband that's been brewing for like 15 years. Why? Well, it's not because the elevator is symbolically related to the fight. It has nothing to do with it. It's because what the person learns in the combat with the unknown.
Oh, you're back?
Hello.
Hello.
They can confront things that frighten them without being destroyed by the confrontation.
Sorry if,
and so what you see immediately,
the volume's weird, because I'm talking over him right now.
Is that, man, you know, you take that personality, you teach them they can go in the elevator.
What are you up to
And
tonight?
right off the bat, they're going to shopping malls, they're in taxis, they're back in the subway, and they're standing up for themselves at home. Generalization. Why? Because they didn't learn that the elevator wasn't frightening. That isn't what they learned. They learned that despite the fact that the elevator was as terrifying as anything they've ever
Thank you for
encountered,
subscribing.
they were actually up to the challenge. And now that's a really useful thing to teach someone, right? Because if you have an obsessive...
There's a chat here, by the way, if you wanted to chat.
He was terrible. He worked in a...
And I can respond with my voice like I was doing on
People
Facebook.
with obsessive-compulsive disorder often very frightened that they'll contaminate someone else. So, like, typical obsessive-compulsive obsession would be, I'll go to a shopping market, I'll touch some fruit from, you know, some third world country.
Sorry, I was
some
watching through
nasty
Facebook before, so I couldn't
I'll
chat.
bring it home and I'll give it to
Huh.
my kids. Well,
No problem.
Look, you know, the chances of that are like 1 in 150,000.
Oh, you were watching like the embed or something. That's why
I don't
you
care.
decided to reload
If the
or click the
chances are only 150,000.
tab or something. That's why it was like
What if
intermittent.
my kids
Okay.
die?
Interesting.
And you think, well, yeah, that does pose a problem, doesn't it? Because
No
it isn't
problem,
exactly
anyway.
clear from a logical perspective where you should draw the risk line.
Yeah. There's only about 13 or 14 minutes left in this video. But we could watch something else, or if you want me to keep reading, I could probably do that.
I might die, I might get sick, I might lose the people that I love. Not only might that happen, it's going to happen. Well, why aren't people afraid of that all the time? We don't really know. An obsessive person becomes aware of it. What do you tell them? You say, do it anyway. Do it anyways. And they learn quickly that if they don't run away from the thing they're afraid of, there's something in them that responds to it. They learn that the fear is not larger than they are. Now, I like Edna Foa's case in particular, because you always might wonder with this, like, what's the limit, right? Okay, yeah, that sounds good in theory, but what if something really terrible's happened to you? Well, what's happened to Edna Foa's patients, that's up there with terrible, right?
Oh,
that's up there with terrible.
Says you left again, I guess?
Stripped of social dignity, violated physically. That combines two of people's most specific fears. Well, then there's other kinds of confrontation too. I like the story of Solzhenitsyn. I think it's really a good one because...
Yeah, Peterson's awesome. I watched Netflix's Mindhunter in... Oh, okay. Weird. YouTube is messing up then. Sorry. I watched Netflix's new series Mindhunter within the span of one day after it came out Friday morning. So, and it's kind of about psychology, even if it specifically focuses on the FBI's behavioral science unit in the 1970s and hunting down psychosexual criminals and stuff. It's still very intriguing. Also, even though it's fictional, so it's just a lot of the Peterson stuff, I guess, just enacted in a, you know, period-piece fiction drama thing. It's also by my favorite director, David Fincher, so I was into that. Okay, maybe I'll have to look into it. Yeah, if you can stomach it, because there's a scene even in the first 3 minutes that's kind of graphic. But even throughout the series, the 10 hours, the 10 episodes, 9 hours long, there's some graphic images. But yeah, David Fincher also directed Seven and Zodiac, which are films about serial killers. So yeah, he's broached the topic before, David Fincher. And there's some subtle nods and references to those in Silence of the Lambs and other movies like that about characters like these. So, anyway, I'll hit play on Peterson. I can handle it. Cool.
There's different kinds of dragons, right? There's natural dragons like death and disease, and then there's social dragons like bureaucracies and tyrannies. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you may or may not know, was a prisoner in the Soviet Gulag concentration camp system that, by his report at least, killed 60 million people between 1919 and 1959.
And that's an interesting lecture I watched of his too. It's Personality 13, 2017. He mainly looks at Solzhenitsyn, however you say it. He talks about his book. It's a good video.
60 million people at least killed 60.
I thought about listening to that book too. There's the whole audio version on YouTube. Maybe that's what I should read aloud. Probably get away with it. The Gulag Archipelago. That's how you spell it. Yeah. Yeah, there's a 7-part audiobook on YouTube. Maybe that's what I should perform. I don't know. So that looks interesting too. Huh. Anyway.
50 million people in concentration camp systems like bureaucracies and tyrannies. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you may or may not know, was a prisoner in the Soviet Gulag concentration camp system that, by his report at least, killed 60 million people between 1919 and 1959. Right? 60 million. That's 10 times as many as Hitler killed, at least with regards to the genocide. 60 million people. Solzhenitsyn, he had a pretty nasty life. I mean, first of all, he's on the Russian front, which was a nasty place to be. Then he was captured by the Germans, and they didn't like Russians. So they put them in separate prisoners of war camp, partly because Stalin, who was a consummate paranoid, wouldn't sign the Geneva Convention on the treatment of prisoners of war. So the Germans set up extra POW camps for the Russians, and they starved generally so badly that if other POWs were in the vicinity, they'd throw food packages over the wire, even though they themselves weren't particularly well fed. So then the war ends and the Russians win, and Solzhenitsyn goes back to Russia, right? And what happens? He's thinking, you know, wow, this is over. We helped defend the fatherland. We're going to get, if not a hero's welcome, at least some welcome. But Stalin figured, no, these Russians who'd been to the West, they were contaminated by their exposure to the Western economic system. And as a consequence of that, they posed a threat to the integrity of the Soviet state, so he just threw them all in concentration camps. So fine. So Solzhenitsyn's sitting there in this concentration camp on a coal pile which contained this kind of clay that his compatriots would eat because they were so damn hungry that it was better to have the clay in their stomach than nothing at all. And he thought, all right, what the hell did I do to get here?
Oh no. What
Which
time?
Really
Whoa, what the hell? Sorry, I thought I paused. He stood still for a second right when I hit pause, or tried to. Anyway. What time is it for you? 10 a.m. Just wanted to see what you were up to. Oh, okay. That's cool. Thanks for checking in. Mostly watching YouTube, yeah. Might have been playing games. Might have been trying to do ASMR. Some people suggest that. People who know what ASMR is say I would be good for it. Oh, 322 here as well. I think you're in Nebraska or Kansas. It's been a while since we talked, so sorry if I remember wrong. I might be close geographically with my guesses. I like ASMR. Okay, cool. Yeah, so people who know what ASMR is generally suggest I make it, because I've got, like, when I talk soft and slow and stuff, and deep, like right now, I could pull it off. And if I comb my hair, or brush my hair rather, which is one of my favorite kinds of ASMR to listen to. But yeah, my biggest issue in terms of entering the ASMR world, I think, is the majority of people who don't know what it is probably think it's creepy or sexual or something. So I would be concerned about not doing ASMR anonymously. I'd be afraid to do it as myself and like promote it and like what would I call my ASMR channel or anything. But I've kind of already done an ASMR stream on my YouTube, my personal YouTube, or two. Or I've used the term around, so people probably know that I know. They totally do. What, find it creepy and sexual? Yeah, sadly, Some of it, yeah, but some of it actually is creepy to me, even, or sexual on purpose, and that's not real ASMR. Yeah, but I digress. Jordan Peterson. He's got a few really good clips in particular that aren't hours long, that are like 5 minutes long. His appearances on Joe Rogan are also really good. He's been on Rogan 3 times now. So if you want to hear that guy talk for like 9 hours on subjects like these, it's very cool. Very good. And the third one is with co-chaired by Brett Weinstein, which is a great little roundtable there. I don't know if you know who Brett Weinstein is. You see Jordan and Brett have similar stories because they're both university professors in North America who had run-ins with SJWs, you could say, who wanted to get them fired. Stuff like that. You may have heard their stories, I don't know. But yeah, their conversation on Rogan, Brett and Jordan, they talk about the evolutionary basis for eugenics, basically. And it's a very touchy subject, which they keep joking about. So, not just eugenics, but racism and sexism. Not sexism, no. They say that sexism doesn't really apply there, but racism in particular. As a deep evolutionary practice of eugenics and tribalism and stuff like that. Have not. Okay, well, I'll tell you about those some other time then, probably, because you should go to sleep. You have to be awake in 6 hours or so. But, yeah, I was going to try to find, like, my favorite Peterson clip, if I could ever find it. It's probably in one of my playlists that I make. Tools for seeing life properly, I wonder. Intimations, man-child. I like the picture of Muhammad, but that's kind of a weird one to start with. Okay, and yes I should. Thanks, Hunter. You can send it to me whenever you want. Sure. Yeah, I'm sure we'll see each other around on the Facebook. Especially if I keep reading that book. Maybe tomorrow night after work. Around the same time I started tonight, really. Bye, good night. Sweetest dreaming, whether awake or asleep. Nighty-night. Huh. Okay. I think that might be the one right there.
Look, let's say you're socially anxious. Okay, so what happens when you're socially anxious? You go to a party, your heart's beating. Why? The party is a monster. Why? Because it's judging you. And it's judging you, it's putting you low down the dominance hierarchy, because that's what a negative judgment is. And that interferes with your sexual success. And that means that you're being harshly evaluated by nature itself. Right? So you are confronting the dragon of chaos when you go into the social situation. And so what do? You're like this, right? You hunch over, and that's low dominance. I'm no threat. It's like, well, that's not going to get you very far. You know, but that's a logical thing to do in the face of a tyrant. So I'm no threat. You know, you look at the king and you're dead. I'm no threat. I'm hunched over. And then what's happening internally? What are people thinking about me? What are people thinking about me? Am I looking stupid? Am I looking foolish? Geez, I'm awkward. I hate being here. Man, I'm sweating too much. It's all internalized, right? It's all self-focused. The eye isn't working. What do you tell people? Don't stop thinking about yourself, because you can't. It's like, don't think of a white elephant. White elephant, white elephant, white elephant. You can't tell someone to stop thinking about something because they get caught in the loop. What you do with socially anxious people is you say, look at other people. Look at them, right? Why? Because if you look at them, you can tell what they're thinking. And then unless you're terribly socialized, and some people are. Some people have no social skills, and so the reason they can't go to a party is because they don't even know how to introduce themselves. Like, they're just, no one ever taught them how to behave. And so they're really good candidates for behavior therapy, because you walk them through the process of how you actually manifest the procedures that are associated with social acceptability. But most people aren't like that. They have the ability. So if they're really introverted and high in neuroticism, they can usually talk quite well to someone one-on-one. Why? Because they look at them. Well, if I look at you, it's another thing to do if you're ever speaking to a group of people. Never speak to the group of people. That doesn't exist. You talk to individuals, and then they reflect for you the entire group, because they're all entrained. So you look at one person, they broadcast to you what everyone's thinking, and you know how to talk to one person. So it's easy. So as soon as you focus on the person, not you, you push your attention outward, use your eye, you push your attention outward, and you start watching. Well, then all your automatic mechanisms kick in, and you stop being awkward. Because if we're talking, and I'm looking here, I don't know what you're going to do next, and I'm going to put disjunctions into they're like bad chords in the melody of our conversation. And the reason is I'm not paying attention. So that's why the eye is the thing at the top of the pyramid. It's like the thing that enables you to win the set of all possible dominance hierarchies is the eye. Pay attention. Pay attention. That's the critical issue. That's why the Egyptians worshipped Horus. That's why Horus was the thing that rescued Osiris from the depths. It's the capacity to pay attention. What do you pay attention to most? What your right hemisphere signals as anomalous. It attracts your attention. It's like, this isn't going quite right. I'm not looking at that. Wrong. That's what you look at. That's what you look at. What's not going right. Because that's the terrible monster that might eat you, but it's also the place you get all the information. So that's why it's useful to have discussions with your enemies, because they will tell you things you do not know. And that's such a great thing, because if you don't know them, well, you're not very smart, are you? You know, there may be a time when you go somewhere that's the thing you need to know. And maybe your enemy will tell you why you're such a fool, you know, and a bunch of other things that aren't true too. But even one thing that's accurate, it's like, yeah, thanks very much, man. Maybe I'll do some work on that, and I won't have to carry that forward. So, and then that's part of the reason, again, why the terrible predator, it's always the terrible predator that has the gold. It's like, it's the person who delivers the message you do not want to hear. So it's rough, but it doesn't matter. Life is rough. What could you do to improve yourself? Well, let's step one step backwards. The first question might be, why should you even bother improving yourself? And I think the answer to that is something like, so you don't suffer any more stupidly than you have to. And maybe so others don't have to either. It's something like that. You know, like there's a real injunction at the bottom of it. It's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way, and so will the people around you. Now, and you could say, well, I don't care about that, but that's actually not true. You actually do care about that, because if you're in pain, you will care about it. And so you do care about it, even if it's just that negative way, you know. It's very rare that you can find someone who's in excruciating pain who would ever say, well, it would be no better if I was out of this.
And with that, I think I'm going to force myself to sleep at this point. Wait, we have a second viewer. Never mind. I'll stick around, if you'll stick around. Hello. How are you doing tonight, this morning, whatever time it is?
Is one of those things that brings the idea that it would be better if it didn't exist along with it. It's incontrovertible. So you get your act together so that there isn't any more stupid pain around you than necessary. Well, so then the question might be, well, how would you go about getting your act together? And the answer to that, and this is a phenomenological idea too, it's something like, look around for something that bothers you and see if you can fix it. So now you think, well, let's say you go into you can do this in a room. It's quite fun to do it just when you're sitting in a room, like a room, maybe your bedroom. You can sit there and just sort of meditate on it and think, okay, if I wanted to spend 10 minutes making this room better, what would I have to do? And you have to ask yourself that, right? It's not a command, it's like a genuine question. And things will pop out in the room that you know, like, there's a stack of papers over there that's kind of bugging you, and you know that maybe a little order there would be a good thing, and you know, there's some rubbish behind your computer monitor that you haven't attended to for like 6 months, and the room would be slightly better if it was a little less dusty and the cables weren't all tangled up the same way. And like, if you allow yourself just to consider the expanse in which you exist at that moment, there'll be all sorts of things that will pop out in it that you could just fix. And you know, I might say, well, if you were coming to see me for psychotherapy, this easiest thing for us to do first would just be to get you to organize your room. You think, well, is that psychotherapy? And the answer is, well, it depends on how you conceive the limits of your being. And I would say, start where you can start. You know, if something announces itself to you, which is a strange way of thinking about it, as in need of repair, that you could repair, then hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. Now, I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial, right? You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you know, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do. Hands down. All you have to do is do the arithmetic. You figure it out right away. So 100 adjustments to your broader domain of being, and there's a lot less rubbish around, and a lot fewer traps for you to step into. And so that's in keeping with Jung's idea about erasing once you've got your mind and your emotions together, and once you're acting that out, then you can extend what you're willing to consider yourself and start fixing up the things that are part of your broader extent. Now, sometimes you don't know how to do that, so you might say, imagine you're walking down Bloor Street and there's this guy who's like alcoholic and schizophrenic and has been on the streets for 10 years. He sort of stumbled towards you and, you know, incoherently mutters something. That's a problem. And it would be good if you could fix it, but you haven't got a clue about how to fix that. You just walk around that and go find something that you could fix, because if you muck about in that, not only is it unlikely that you'll help that person, it's very likely that you'll get hurt yourself. So, you know, just because while you're experiencing things announce themselves as in need of repair, doesn't mean that it's you right then and there that should repair them. You have to have some humility. You know, you don't walk up to a helicopter that isn't working and just start tinkering away with it. You have to stay within your domain.
Well, I'm actually gonna go this time. So, once again, thank you for tuning in. Ha ha ha. Bye for now, talk to you later, see you around. But in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And good luck, and sweetest dreaming, whether wake or sleep. Nighty night.